Bore da pawb, good morning everyone. It's really good to be with you this morning to talk about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I caught about 20 minutes of the end of your discussions from your workshop, and I think there's lots of the points that were raised in what I heard in those last 20 minutes that I wanted to cover today. And I'm sure the rest of the conference we'll hear very many numbers. You will have heard them all before, numbers, statistics, facts about ACEs. And whilst, of course, it's absolutely vital that we understand the scale of what we're dealing with here, I think I wanted to start off this morning by a story. So a real-life example of how much early adversity in childhood can affect later lives and the often devastating consequences that can happen because of a failure to act earlier. And a reminder that when we talk about ACEs, we're talking about real lives, and I know that very many of you in the audience today are working directly with people who have encountered ACEs in their past, who are living ACEs at the moment, and you will understand that real adversity and the real lives of these people. So, hoping that this works. Okay, so this is Rachel. Rachel Williams, or she's now Rachel Court. She met her husband her then husband in 1993 when she was aged 20. And at first he seemed quite charming, lovable, likeable, but she realised, she says early on, that he had what she described as a short fuse. So Rachel fell pregnant a year into her relationship with him, and she said that the first sign of violence was when she was 6 months pregnant. She says he lifted me off the floor and only let me go when I started to turn blue. He was very possessive and jealous of me. He would put me on a pedestal, say that no one else compared to me, and that we would be together in this life and the next. And in reality, the life they shared together over the next 16 years was one that was filled with domestic violence and abuse. And they had 2 sons together, Josh and Jack, and they frequently fell victim in terms of witnessing their mother being subjected to repeated abuse. And both boys were in the room one day when Rachel's husband strangled her. And at 6'7" and 22 stone, his formidable power absolutely terrified Rachel. And it was at that point she decided that she couldn't take any more, and she gathered the strength to leave her husband and to file for divorce. Now, no one had ever spotted that Rachel was a victim of domestic abuse. No one had even asked her. She'd been a victim of domestic abuse for 16 years. The children were experiencing problems at school. They were truanting. Her husband had had regular contact for different issues with the police, but no one had ever picked this up. Or maybe they had picked it up, but they hadn't done anything about it. So in August 2011, Rachel left Darren and was filing for divorce. And she knew at that point that her life was in danger. And in August 2011, her husband stormed into the hair salon where she worked with a sawn-off shotgun, opened fire and shot Rachel twice in the leg, striking her and kicking her on the floor. And at the time of the shooting, her husband was on bail for domestic assault charges. He was a frequent user of both steroids and antidepressants. He was later found in the nearby woods, having taken his own life. And as Rachel recovered in hospital, the failures to provide adequate support and care for her 16-year-old son, Jack, meant that 6 weeks later, absolutely tragically, Jack committed suicide, took his own life in the same place as his father. And I think as Jack's family continue to mourn his loss to this day, and this is a Facebook post from Jack's brother Josh, I think it's a reminder of this family's story that is a tragedy that actually spanned generations. And in reality, it can actually be traced back through the decades to look at the father's own family. It turned out that he actually grew up in an abusive household as a child. As a child, he suffered from asthma and was bullied at school. Like him, his brother had mental health issues and was violent and abusive towards his wife. Like him, his brother also committed suicide. His sister had a child at 15 and another at 16, and it is also reported that his father was brought up in a violent household. And what I think this story demonstrates is ACEs in real time. So we can almost chart the adverse experiences as the backdrop for this tragic case. And of course, these cases won't always end up as catastrophically and as devastatingly as this one did. Or at least that might not be as obvious as the way that this case ended up. But undoubtedly, ACEs, when they transmit from generation to generation, will have devastating consequences. So I think at every stage of this story, we can look back and we can think, what if? So what if someone had intervened earlier to offer to support Jack or to Rachel's husband, to his own dad? What if the services Rachel had come into contact with during their 18-year relationship had had training, using the perspective of survivors of domestic abuse and spotted signs and intervened earlier in a way which was responsive to the specific and very sensitive needs of domestic abuse victims? What if they'd understood what the services then needed to look like in terms of helping her out of that relationship? What if the services looking after Jack following the death of his father had been better integrated? What if they'd shared information? They'd have quickly been able to spot, Rachel says, that Jack was acting out of character, that he was crying out for support. And what if public services did more to prevent these tragedies from occurring? What if they did more to confront these issues rather than waiting to deal with the painful consequences? And so that's where I think the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act comes in. So I know it's been mentioned a number of times today, and I'm hoping that most of you will have heard of it, but it's a groundbreaking piece of legislation introduced in 2015, and it looks to reshape the way that the public sector works. The legislation really, if you read the narrative around it, it says, for the first time we're legislating for sustainable development. And sometimes it's difficult to think, what on earth, if you ask the average person on the street what is sustainable development, they'll probably tell you it's something to do with the environment. Yes, it's about the environment, but actually what it's looking at is the interconnections between the ways that we live and work in Wales. So what it recognises is that our economy is intrinsically linked to to our society and the health of our society. It recognises that culture is as important, and access to sports and cultural activities is perhaps as important in terms of our health and well-being as access to the NHS. It recognises that our environment is absolutely crucial to all of that because, if you look at jobs and growth, there's no jobs on a dead planet. It looks at all of those connections in an integrated way. And it places a duty on the 44 public bodies, our main public bodies, including the Welsh Government itself, all of our local authorities, all of our health boards, and a number of our national bodies, to do 5 things, 5 ways of working. So our public bodies must now be demonstrating that they're taking a long-term view when they're planning their services. They must be looking to prevent problems before they occur. It means that they need to be better at collaborating because no one public body or sector can solve the challenges that we face in Wales alone. It means that they need to think about integration, so think about the impact of the decisions that they take on in one area and how those impact across another range of issues. And it means, crucially, that they must involve people. And I say people, and for me, that's the person, not the service user, the client or the customer that we've come very accustomed to calling people in the public sector. But the individual, we need to involve individuals, your mum, your neighbour, your aunt, your daughter, your father. Involve people as people and recognise that they have an individual view and an individual specific needs of how they receive public services. So it means taking a holistic perspective with regards to a person's well-being and ensuring that we are acting today for a better tomorrow. So as I said, it doesn't just mean kind of high-level consultations which have responses from the usual suspects. The Welsh Government issued 647 consultations last year. Did any of you respond? Did any of your next-door neighbours respond? high-level consultations are one way of doing things, but do they actually get us to understand the lives that people are leading, and how we need to develop policies and services in a way that is going to work for them? So we need to be understanding the lives that people lead, even if they are very different to our own. And when the Act was passed, the United Nations said, we hope what Wales is doing today, the world will do tomorrow. And there was a second part of that quote, which isn't as widely used, but is more important in my view. And they said, action more than words is the hope for future generations. And actually, you know, that is the most important part, because the legislation gives us the words, and we all now have an obligation of turning those words into action. And for me, the ongoing work around adverse childhood experiences are, you know, something around that Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in action. Because I think taking action on ACEs is perhaps the best example of where we can make a real difference to the lives of future generations here in Wales. And the Act sets out, as you can see through the wheel here, a set of 7 interconnected wellbeing goals. So together we are aspiring to a prosperous and resilient Wales with a secure and growing economy, a healthier Wales where issues such as obesity and intergenerational health problems, issues like ACEs are overcome, a more equal Wales in which a child can hope to prosper and succeed no matter where they're from, a Wales of more cohesive communities in which people feel involved, engaged and supported, a Wales of thriving culture and vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language, where our sporting and artistic achievements are encouraged and continued, and our language and heritage are cherished and nurtured, and finally a globally responsible Wales, forward-thinking and outward-looking, leading the way with regards to sustainable development and making a global impact. And for us to get there, and, you know, that's a big task. And when people often ask me, oh, gosh, you know, is there anything that you're not a commissioner kind of responsible for? And sometimes it feels not. It's quite challenging to think that you need to look at the way the public services are working for the entire population of Wales, every policy area, and everyone who isn't born yet. That's quite a big ask, actually. But, you know, I'm not in this alone. And I guess, you know, what I've heard from you this morning, and by virtue of the very fact that you're here, passionate about how we can take steps to address ACEs, there are hundreds and thousands of absolutely passionate individuals like you who want to make this work. And I think for us to achieve the goals, it's going to take more than just the public sector and more than just the devolved bodies. It's going to take a cross-sector approach. And it's through embedding the Sustainable Development Principles, these 5 ways of working, that I think we will see genuine change. Because I'm sure that you all know, and I'm sure you're at the receiving end of the sort of strain that's on our public services at the moment, and we often talk about public services reaching breaking point. And you can't turn on the TV or look online or read newspapers without daily reports of a crisis throughout health and social care systems and many of our other public services. And with our increasing ageing population, these problems are likely to get worse. So we can no longer afford to take short-term, short-sighted decisions. We must be realistic in the way that we look at future trends for our population here in Wales, and we must look at how we can tackle ACEs now so that we're not storing up problems for Wales and for public services in Wales in the longer term. If we're to put an end to these intergenerational cycles of abuse, poor mental health, poor physical health, trauma, poor life decisions and employment, we need to ensure that we are in this for the long term. And previous Public Health Wales research has shown that eradicating ACEs could ultimately result in over 125,000 less smokers across Wales and over 55,000 fewer users of crack cocaine. So imagine if we just took those numbers out of the equation that we're dealing with, what the cost savings would be to our public services, what the cost savings would be to people's lives. And this has further implications for our criminal justice system. So the ACEs report has showed that over 80% of all criminal activity in Britain is attributed to people who have had behavioural problems or in childhood or adolescence. And furthermore, one current estimate suggests that addressing the current level of social problems in the UK will amount to almost £4 trillion over a 20-year period. So acting now and taking that long-term perspective will help to better inform our work and our policy making in this area. And taking action on ACEs is an investment in a more resilient, healthier, more equal and prosperous Wales for the long term. And of course, a huge part of this work will be about prevention. And it's estimated that late intervention aimed at children and young people in Wales is costing about £16.6 billion. But of course, prevention isn't just about early years and childhood, and a deliberate shift to prevention is necessary for all stages of life throughout the criminal justice system and all aspects of health care. And I know you've talked a lot about how we can respond to people who have experienced ACEs, and there are some questions around, I guess, the evidence base around, does just asking the question if you're a GP, if you're a social worker, does that actually trigger a better response in people who've experienced ACEs? I think the evidence base is there to show that that does have an impact. But I think that's only one part of the jigsaw, because what we need to be looking at here is a whole system reform. So whether you are a substance misuse worker, whether you're someone who's commissioning substance misuse services, it's as much your responsibility to be thinking about how we prevent ACEs as it is to deal with the clients in front of you. Whether you are commissioning services for domestic abuse, and this is a personal passion of mine, and I think it's a national scandal that still domestic abuse services are dealt with in a piecemeal, small handouts here and there, when what we're talking about is domestic abuse being one of the core issues in respect of adverse childhood experiences. So it's as much the responsibility of the people who are commissioning those services to think about how they do that in a way that those domestic abuse services are there for people when they need them and have a role in preventing ACEs and the kind of intergenerational ongoing transmission. So it's about informing our adults of the future and whether they will become adults who are in a position to make a contribution to society, or whether they will be adults for whom our public services will need to be directing a whole range of resources from police, social services, and of course the NHS. And I think what the Act does, lots of people say to me, the Act is giving me permission. Because I think out there in the public sector, there are lots of what I would call frustrated champions. People who can see that there's a better way of doing things, people who can see that sometimes the bureaucracy, the kind of budget boundaries, the service boundaries prevent you from doing the right thing. And this legislation gives you permission to do the right thing. Gives us the space to work towards an alternative and to save us valuable money along the way. And by looking to the long term and not just thinking in the short-term political or budget cycles, as difficult as I recognise that is going to be, those of you who are in local authorities, you will be seeing lots of interesting spending commitments coming to the fore around about now, I'm sure. But it is about breaking those cycles of short-term political or budget cycles and recognising that we all have a part to play to tackle some of our big intergenerational problems. And of course, we need to start from the perspective of the citizen, not from the service. And I think in order to do this successfully, public bodies will need to be better at integrating. And this means that the health visitor, the school nurse, the social worker, the police officer that picks up children when truanting all need to work together to share resources and information better. These are not different issues and shouldn't be different budgets. These are the same issues and should be everyone's problem. And it also means that response to the problem cannot solely be based on process. So on filling in forms, on making referrals to one agency or another, or of allocating services that fit with our organisations and not what people actually need. And my last role was as Deputy Police Commissioner in South Wales, and this is an area where we began working on adverse childhood experiences a number of years ago. And of course, the problems for the police include increasing demand, particularly in respect of vulnerability. And that's quite an interesting point when what you will hear quite often, not so much anymore, but quite often from a corps of police officers who will tell you, actually, I'm a police officer, not a social worker. Well, my response to that is that when 70 to 80% of your demand is vulnerability, actually you need to be more like a social worker than a police officer. So we need to be transforming the way that we're thinking about the roles that we have in the public sector and challenge our silo thinking and our silo working. The other interesting thing that we found when we looked at this issue within the police service is that we spent a lot of time filling in forms and dealing with bureaucracy. So in the police service, we have something called a PPN, a Public Protection Notice. I'm sure some of you will have been on the receiving end of those sorts of referrals and forms. And we spent an awful lot of time filling in these PPNs. But what we found is that 88% of the PPNs we filled in resulted in no further action. So that's where a police officer has attended an issue of domestic violence or some concerns around safeguarding and vulnerability, and we would go through the process of doing a risk assessment, and we'd fill in the form and we'd send it to social services, and social services are overwhelmed by the thousands and thousands and thousands of forms that they get, and you may or may not look at them, and you may or may not share your information, and in any case, 88% of them, nothing actually happens. So what we know is we know that there are all of these cases where there's something going on in this family, but we wait because it doesn't meet our threshold, so we wait until the situation gets worse and worse and worse, until it does meet our threshold, and at that point we intervene. So there are some significant challenges there on the amount of time we are spending on bureaucracy and process and not actually resolving the problems. And there were similar experiences in Gwent, where they looked at how they were dealing with missing children. So there were a myriad of risk assessments, there were case conferences, there were referrals galore, and still some kids were going missing more than 100 times. And if you map that out in cost terms, it would probably have been cheaper to employ a permanent support, full-time support worker for each of those young people who were going missing on that number of occasions. And yet, what they continued to do for quite a long period of time was going through the motions of a system that wasn't working. Until that was, they set up what they call a MISPA hub, multi-agency working, where the needs of the child are at the centre, where they're working with the third sector, who are often better placed to engage with children and young people, understand their issues and communicate than the frontline public sector professionals. So where they have people working directly with those young people, building relationships and doing what is going to work for them, not what's going to work for our organisations or our processes. And they've seen a huge reduction in the number of missing children incidents in that area. It's not rocket science, but that, that willingness to bring things together and operate from the perspective of the individual. And I heard a lot in the earlier session that we need to be thinking about ACEs as being everyone's business, and I couldn't agree more. And I think tackling these issues will reduce demand on health, social services, the criminal justice system. And actually, when we go back to the aims of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and combine those issues around the social well-being of Wales and the economic well-being of Wales, I also think that tackling ACEs could have a significant impact on the prosperity of Wales. And I've been quite interested in some work that has been done by an organisation called Social Finance, who did some work looking at the issue of NEETs with the local authority in Newcastle in England. They're a not-for-profit organisation who specialise in a kind of in-depth analysis and looking at social return on investment. And they were commissioned by Newcastle City Council to do some deeper digging to help them address the problems of those not in education, employment or training. And I guess when we think about our traditional responses to tackling NEETs, and those of you from the education sector, I'm sure will recognise this in policy-making terms, what we've thought is that the problem we have with NEETs is that they don't have 5 good GCSEs. Well, it's true to say, often if you're NEET, you haven't got 5 good GCSEs. And the response, therefore, is to focus on academic achievement, to invest in a range of additional support and resources and programmes in schools. Except what the analysis showed in Newcastle was that in reality, academic achievement is not the most significant factor at all. So the work showed that in Newcastle, 67% of 17 to 19-year-olds who were NEET had come from the 25% of 17 to 19-year-olds who had, at some point during their childhood, had contact with social services. Now, I'm not saying that social services turns people NEET, but what I'm saying, and we're not just talking about looked after children here, because we all know the particularly challenging circumstances in terms of their outcomes, but actually those children who had had as little as 6 interactions with social services spent almost 3 times longer out of education, employment or training as other children or young people. And so I do think we need to be looking at things differently. We need to be really digging deep into the analysis. We need to be challenging our traditional assumptions of what works and what the actual problem or issue is. I think that that will require far greater collaboration between public bodies to bring about this shift. And the Public Services Boards brought in by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act are another example of that collaborative approach, as they bring together partners from public bodies, including local authorities, Natural Resources Wales, Fire and Rescue Services, and a wider range of public and third sector partners who can help them to deliver on the wellbeing of their area. And I thought what was quite interesting is when I recently spoke to Torfaen Public Service Board and was in a workshop group with a range of organisations who are involved in the Public Service Board there, and I was sitting next to a police officer and the question was put to everyone in your workshop, what would success look like in terms of what your Public Service Board would have done by this time next year? And his response was, actually, I think our Public Service Board should look like the Gwent Missing Persons Hub, because where we've got to there is we've actually forgotten what organisations we come from. We've forgotten where our budgets are. We just do what needs to be done for the person. And that, I think, is as good a measure of success for those Public Service Boards as anything else. And so I think also in terms of involvement is where public bodies really need to start from. I recently heard a story from one PSB who are doing some really interesting work on mapping vulnerability, where a family, a mum, a partner and 4 kids living in a housing association property were struggling to live in worryingly cramped conditions with varying health conditions from anxiety to obesity, past debt. The youngest child is disabled and is unable to walk. The kids can't get to school on time because of these mobility difficulties. The situation is becoming more and more stressful, and the family currently receive support and intervention from 13 different service providers. However, the reality for the family is that they are on the brink of crisis despite that level of intervention and help. And the professionals are so focused on each particular issue within that family that they are failing to respond to the wider issues and fundamental issues. And one of the biggest issues is actually that the youngest child needed increased mobility support. And if someone had taken the time to involve, to ask mum just what support she actually needs, rather than offer a particular package of things that we think we should provide, it's likely that some of those 13 issues would have been resolved and not needed further interventions from each of those different services. So there is a real need for us to shift and start from the perspective of the real person, and we need to ensure that public services become more human and actually reflect the realities of people's lives. And if we're really to take action on ACEs, it needs to come from a real understanding of that adversity. We need to ensure that we are part of a system that enables us to help, not provide further barriers to our most vulnerable members of society. And when we think about some of the very basic things in our system, the fact that a child could have witnessed mum or dad being beaten up last night and being up in the early hours with the police, and yet there's no mechanism for notifying their school of what they've witnessed the following day. We know that there's something going very wrong in the system we are operating in at the moment. The fact that in some areas someone with a substance misuse problem who enters the criminal justice system could go through several different services, in and out and often back into the system. The fact that if you're in mental health crisis you could well end up in custody rather than in hospital. Is our system at the moment really helping to tackle and to prevent ACEs? And this comes back to this being a whole system approach and being everyone's business, because it comes to a point where we cannot continue to just do things better. We actually need to do better things. Because I think there's every chance that when you grow up in a war zone, you do, of course, become a warrior. And I really like this quote, that the kids who need the most love will often ask for it in the most unloving of ways. And I'm sure that you have dealt with very many difficult children. I'm sure today in classrooms across Wales, teachers are dealing with what are described as difficult children. Actually, they're children who have experienced trauma. They are children who have experienced it or are experiencing adverse childhood experiences. And so our system needs to recognise and respond to the fact that sometimes these children who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving of ways. And so whilst we might be talking about early years and adverse childhood experiences, what we're actually talking about, as I keep saying, is whole system reform. It's not just core business for health visitors, for midwives, or even for our school system. is core business for us all. So whether you're a police officer, a mental health nurse, or even if you're a director of finance, because what we're talking about here isn't just morally right, it's actually economically efficient. And so I do think that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act can be a catalyst for change in driving those key transformations within the public sector and ultimately improving lives for future generations. And so I want to ask you to continue to innovate, to continue to inspire, to use your expertise, to be constantly pushing the art of the possible and to be unafraid in doing that. And the Act gives us the opportunity here in Wales, I think, to rewrite the rule book. It recognises and allows the space for us to nurture all aspects of our well-being, because I think life exists within the nuance, and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act relies and depends on us understanding those nuances, understanding people in a holistic way, those complexities, those realities of lives, and making the changes that they need today. I want to finish, whilst I've got a captive audience here today, by making a request. My office is currently engaging in a conversation. I'm certainly not calling it a consultation, because as you've probably gathered, I don't like consultations, really. This is an ongoing conversation which started last year regarding the areas in which I will focus on in my term as Commissioner, so I have another 6 years left. And we've identified 4 key challenges for the future. So let's see if I can get those up. No, it's not coming up. Okay, so they are climate change, economic change, population change and citizen disengagement. Within the population change, I am suggesting a priority around early years and around tackling adverse childhood experiences. I want to open out the conversation and ask if these are the right challenges and issues affecting future generations, and what are the main opportunities to address them and areas for action. And I've had members of my team here today who will be feeding in what you've been saying today into that conversation. But if I can ask you to take a moment to fill in our SenseMaker survey, which is quite an innovative tool that we are trialling to help people express their views and experiences, as well as just getting kind of data analysis out of it. So if you are able to fill that survey in on my website, I would be very grateful. I want to thank you very much for listening today, and I hope that you will be working with me and that we can work together to act today for a better tomorrow. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.